I think being a founder, you kind of have to make peace with like 95% of things you do just aren't going to work.
We always think the product is going to carry the weight. More than the product, it's the messaging.
Like everyone's talking about making data-driven decisions. I have a suspicion that no one actually does it. They just talk about it.
When I went and became one of the co-founders at Concierge Auctions, which we really built a tech company within Concierge that after I left, they sold to Berkshire Hathaway.
Another thing that like kind of seemed like a good idea was...
Hello, and welcome to the Seem Like a Good Idea podcast. I'm your host, Mike Russo, and this is where I dive into the key decisions that shape the careers of some of the world's top executives, entrepreneurs, and investors, exploring the outcomes of ideas that seemed great at the time. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my friend Melissa Kwan. Melissa is a 3-time bootstrapped founder, current CEO of eWebinar, and the former founder with a successful exit of Spacio. Hi, Melissa. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
I'm so excited. So you're in New York. I heard like attendance for Burning Man was down, but did you go?
I did. I went this year. It was down, but I think in a good way.
Yeah.
Like it was busy, vibey, but not overcrowded. It didn't seem like people I think that have gone in the previous years knows that attendance was down. But if this was your first year, like you probably just had a great time. Also because weather was perfect every day.
That's nice.
After having rain last year.
Right. The pouring. How many times have you gone?
This was my third.
And why do you keep going? You're the only person I probably know other people, but I never really asked, but like you're the only person I sort of know that definitely goes.
I mean, there's just no place like it. It's impossible to explain for someone who's like not really into like Burning Man and festivals and that kind of culture. But it's the only place where a city like literally gets built. You kind of see, if you go on the first day, you see it getting built. A lot of people kind of devote their lives to it, and of course, like just the large scale structures and art cars and, just seeing people's creativity and, there's no money exchange, right? So everything is gifted.
Sure.
It's just a different world. And I think it being hard to get there is kind of a natural filter. So everyone you meet there is, kind of like you, I guess, in some way, or approaches life and people kind of in a more open-minded way, I guess. It's just super hard to explain. But over the years, we've met a lot of good friends that also make the journey there every year. So it's just kind of become a gathering place.
And sort of along the theme of seemed like a good idea. So I used to race sailboats offshore, right? Not professionally, but like, I've sailed from Newport to Bermuda a few times, and we've been at times like offshore hundreds of miles and really bad weather and 8-foot seas and, 50-foot winds. And you're in that moment and you're like, why did I do this? This is insane, right? And like, this definitely was not a good idea. But then you get to the end of the destination and you're just like, oh my God, that was amazing. Like, I can't wait to do it again. Right. So
Yeah.
It's like Burning Man sort of like that. Like there is some suffering along of like this journey, and like the year you were in the rain, it was just like miserable. And you're like, I'm never doing it. Like, is it anything like that?
I mean, I think definitely some people had a really bad time when there was bad weather. I personally did not.
Yeah.
I mean, David, my partner, had a great time also. But there's definitely like times when you're like, why are we choosing this? Like, I remember there'd be times where there's like a 6-hour dust storm and you're just out, dancing with your friends and, your whole face is wrapped, right? Like with your mask and your goggles and, the sun's out and you're like, we're choosing this and it's fun, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think all of that, like, quote unquote, suffering is definitely part of the journey and we get to laugh about it. But, there's certain times when you're riding your bike and you can't see 2 feet in front of you because there's like a massive whiteout dust storm and you're like, why am I here again? But in the end, it's just always a good time.
That's awesome. How many years has it been since you started eWebinar? It seems, I'm going to guess it was pre-COVID, right? So like 5?
Yeah, it's been 5 years. So I sold Spacio in 2019, January, and then I started eWebinar 2 months after that.
2 months. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was that fast.
Well, I needed something else because I was just not stimulated.
Yeah, I remember like the first time we talked, it was like in between, and you were in Kauai, or I know you were in Hawaii.
Yeah, I was on the Big Island for the first part of the pandemic.
Yeah, and that was the first time we met. And so here we are, like 5 years later, and I just read something by you online today of like, I'm like was kind of down, I'm recommitted to the journey, but like maybe during 5 years, like it's about the same amount of time since I started Spark Offer, right? And is there anything even within eWebinar that you tried and said, hey, this seemed like a good idea, I think this is going to either help my business or help growth or help revenue, but then you tried it and decided like, hey, that wasn't a good idea that worked out?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I think being a founder is, and like marketing and, you know, sales and lead gen, that's my job. Revenue is my job, right? So, and I think when you're in that role, like you kind of have to make peace with like 95% of things you do just aren't going to work. And sometimes things might work, but it's not like, oh, like I think the whole idea of this like hockey stick growth, like gives people this misconception that like your job is to find this nugget that's going to propel you forward and then
Right.
everything's going to be fine, right? But the truth is like that's not real. And most of the things that you do is like compounding. It's like compound interest, right? You do a little bit of this and it kind of works, and a little bit of that and that kind of works. So I think a lot of things definitely don't work. And even the things that do work require like significant consistency over time for it to have any sort of effect. And even then, you can't really attribute that success to that particular thing, right? It's like posting, you know, 1,000 times on LinkedIn, like, does it work or not? There's not one post that works, right? Like,
Right.
even if something goes viral, it's for like 2 days, right? But then there's this compound interest of people seeing you over, you know, the last 3 years. So, I mean, I think the obvious things that I could pinpoint that did not work, which I have a podcast episode about this as well, is we spent $130,000 over 10 months on affiliate marketing, like trying that channel,
Right.
actually in hindsight very early on, because, you know, you kind of run out of things to do and you're like, well, people say that if you give out commission, people will just sell my product because my product's awesome. And in the end, that just doesn't happen, right? It's like everything is so simplistic. And then once you go down that path, you realize, oh, actually, the reason why partner managers exist is because affiliate marketing is like a full-time job and people need to be incentivized with a lot of money in order to sell your product and not this other product. So when your product is $99 a month, how much could you possibly pay someone for it to be meaningful for them to sell you versus another company who can pay them, you know, $2,000 up front? All right. So all these things we kind of had to learn.
I struggle with that in the early days of Spark Offer. You know, we've since moved off a SaaS play, but like when we were like definitively in the SaaS play, and, you know, we're in real estate. So, you know, you'd get agents from EXP who were like, you know, they want to make money off of everything, right? Because that's the foundation of their business. And like, I'm going to recruit agents and I'm going to make a piece of their GCI, of their, you know, commission revenue. And then, you know, what else can I sell to them, right? And they would come to me and be like, what do you have for affiliate marketing? And I actually never did it, but I struggled with the same thing, right? Which is like, how excited are you going to be about, like, if I can give you $10 a month, right? Like, you got to go sign up a lot of people to make this worth it, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many issues with affiliate marketing. That's just what I'm talking about is just one of those issues, but there's so many things. That's why I have like a full episode on it. But it's like, it's also things like, if you have a product that needs support, right? Like, so we are the ones that are supporting this customer.
Right.
You put me on a blog and now I have to perpetually pay you $10 a month, which in the end, I don't feel good about it.
Right.
Right. Because you're not supporting that person. So then there's all these people that are like, well, you can cap it at 12 months or whatever. But in the end, like, it's just not a lot of money.
Right.
And we didn't have like an annual plan back then. So it's not like we can give you 50%, you know,
Right.
of
Because you got to worry about
right?
churn.
Well, yeah. And like, you know, there's just so many issues. But another thing that like kind of seemed like a good idea was hiring like I'm kind of like it's a double-edged sword, right? Like I definitely believe in like working with friends, like especially because David's, my life partner.
Yeah.
He's my co-founder and my CTO. But there's certain people that are like friends that I thought it was a good idea to like engage them, train them, but it's really, really difficult because we're a fully remote company. It's really difficult to train a junior person with no work experience if they're not in front of you. Like, I think what we learned from like doing that multiple times, especially like if, friendships were lost or damaged because of those things, is we only work with senior people who like appreciate working remote because maybe they're in a different stage of their life, maybe they have a young family, and they value being able to work remote. And then they're self-motivated, they already know the skills, and then they're more productive, and you just don't have to micromanage them, right? But in the beginning, it's like, well, we don't have to pay that much for this person. They're really motivated, they're young, so they can, so they can learn on their own. Like none of that stuff is true. I think there's something to be said about like young people learning by osmosis first somewhere else, gaining some experience, and then earning the right to be remote when they don't have to be micromanaged, especially with a company that's so small like us.
I think it's tough for young people in general, right? I mean, I hear you. What you're saying is like, it seems like a good idea being remote. We were talking pre-recording of like, I've got a son in New York, but he's in the office every day, 7:30, has to be at his desk. And I have another son. He has an identical twin brother that's been 100% remote since the day he got out of college in this job for a big company, but like it's 100% remote. And just watching the two grow up in corporate America, it's like completely two different things, right? Including like their relationship with their boss. One of them literally sits next to his boss every day, right? There is no, by the way, he can't talk on the phone. It's like, I can't talk to you while I'm on the office because like I'm literally sitting next to my boss, right? Like,
yeah, but he's a banker, like a young banker in New York,
yeah,
right? So like he's got to live this life.
I get it, but like the life of a young person that has no experience or little experience to go work at any company that's fully remote, never mind one with how many people are in eWebinar? Less than 10?
Yeah, we've got like 12 that are full-time.
That's great.
And then like some that are part-time as needed, like, content writers, designers, things like that. But all of our most of them are developers, but we hire through an agency. So they're remote with us.
Right.
But they actually have an office where they are.
Right.
And that's important
like my
for developers.
Right.
Yeah, that's important for them because they kind of learn, they pass ideas together, like, and we knew that to begin with, right? And we have one senior developer that we also hire through an agency in Ukraine, but he's remote in France, but he's super senior.
Right.
Like he's been doing this for 20 years. He's got 2 young kids that he loves spending time with. He loves having zone hours. So like we know that like developers, in their 20s, 30s, like to go into an office and, have the opportunity to be remote, but a lot of them aren't.
As such a small team, and you're talking about like customer service, we do all the customer service. How good do you think, whether it's at Spacio or here, that you've gotten in putting in systems to deal with handling a portion of the work, right? Whether it's, we have a really good customer service system that like I and David and whoever have spent hours populating so most people can find answers to their own questions. Or is it like, hey, we're still like hair on fire, like the email support tickets come into my inbox, and I'm like I still answer intercom on my phone for Spark Offer. Like somebody hits the chat bot and my wife's like, you're not supposed to be looking at your phone right now. I'm like, I got to do customer support.
Yeah, we very, very luckily. I mean, your first question is how good are we at systems? Absolutely terrible. That's why
I love the honesty.
Yeah, but that's why we need people who take care of themselves.
Right.
Right. Everybody takes care of what's on their desk. Right. We don't have time to micromanage. The moment I micromanage you or David has to micromanage you, you got to leave the team.
Right.
right? Because that takes away from us, right? You're brought on the team to help take things off our plate. So if you're adding things, you're not adding value. You're not carrying your weight, right? So we were actually hiring customer support has been the biggest pain in the ass for us that we didn't even solve until last year.
Wow.
And the problem was not that it was hard to hire customer support. The problem was that it was hard to hire technical support. Like anybody can answer product questions, like like myself was doing it, and then our COO was doing it. But when it came to like an integration or like something that required coding and looking to the product, then David had to do it.
Right.
But it was very distracting for him because he could be working on a feature, or like he just doesn't want to work with this like lowly stuff, right? But there was like no one else that could really understand it. So that had been our problem for the longest time. And as much as we tried to solve it with writing help articles and making it searchable and trying to make as you know, we basically write help articles based on the number of questions we get. But there are still things like, oh, my ActiveCampaign doesn't work, my MailChimp doesn't work, you know, my tag is not passing through. And so the biggest problem was the people that could do that job, like a developer, didn't want to be a support person. They wanted to be a developer. But the people that we could hire for CS like understood the product, but they didn't have any coding experience. So we were always kind of stuck in this place. And it was only until last year that we were on a boat trip. We rented a sailboat in Turkey for a week, and one of the deckhands was hired because he spoke perfect English. And then when we were talking to him, like he was a translator between like the locals, like the Turkish people that worked on the boat, and us. And we're just chatting with him. And he was like, yeah, I really want to be a developer. I'm 23, but I don't have any experience and nobody would hire me. And actually, he learned how to speak English by playing games with like other people online and reading the dictionary. And he learned how to code just kind of on his own, but like very basic. And this is the type of people that we want to hire, right? People that like really go and self-educate and really want an opportunity in a country where they like can't get an opportunity with American or Canadian company like us. So we had a conversation with him. We said, hey, we'd love for you to help us out, starting with support if you're willing to do it. And he was so grateful that he had this opportunity, because we also asked him, like, how much would someone like you get paid? Like where you're from. Like he wasn't from like Istanbul. He was like from a smaller town. And he said like $600 US. Like that's insane. A month.
Wow.
So we paid him double, because it was just like 600 is just ridiculously low. And, you know, we have this idea that we want to build a lifestyle company where everybody with our company lives a great lifestyle. So it's been less than a year since he's come on board. He now gets paid $4,000 a month. So he's super, super happy.
Right.
But that's what we would pay someone else in that role, right? And now he's training a new person on support. And since these guys came on, we never look at support again. Like if they have a question, they would just text save it and then they would respond. And now he's also helping write the outlines, the help articles and all that stuff. Like this guy's amazing. So we were only able to solve this particular problem by meeting someone completely random and not actually hiring for support, but looking for more of like a junior dev where maybe like if they perform, they can help us on bigger things later on. But like, yeah, we haven't looked at support for a year because of that.
It's an amazing story. I went sailing and I met my next junior dev.
It's like they paid us to rent that sailboat. Like, in hindsight.
I find here, you know, I deal with people, you know, in Eastern Europe too, right? We have developers in Eastern Europe, and it's been interesting. I have a huge appreciation for them, because like I look around what we have here in the US, and I mean, to be honest, everyone's just so spoiled.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And they're constantly changing jobs.
Right.
Constantly.
And
like it's also like that in Canada. But how can a startup like us compete when some other funded startup is giving, you know, options and, you know, cool offices or whatever it might be? Like we actually don't hire from North America.
It's almost, I mean, I looked at it, it's just almost impossible. Right.
Yeah.
So how about it? Like, is there anything outlandish of something that you said, like, boy, this is a great idea. And then it just like 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, you're just like, man, that was a really bad idea.
I mean, are we limiting it to eWebinar?
No, it could be anything.
I actually thought my last, so I had three startups, right? Like I had Spacio, which I sold. I spent 5 years there, but it was sold in like year 4. The first 3 years were really bad. And then I had an agency that built apps for real estate developers on the iPad for like 4.5 years before Spacio. So I actually thought those 2 startups were very, very bad ideas. Like, I mean, I now actually feel like one of my goals in life is to like actively convince people not to go into real estate tech.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't do it. Like, you think there's big opportunities, but don't do it. But yeah, I mean, I think Spacio, like in the beginning, was like, yeah, that's a great idea, because I was so sick of building apps for other people. I wanted to build a product that we could offer everybody else. So it was actually my first SaaS product that we sold, which seemed like a really great idea. But like a couple of years in, I'm like, what am I doing?
Right.
Like, why am I creating this thing to sell to an audience that doesn't even buy or value technology to begin with?
Right.
So every sale was this like uphill battle, but then I was like too deep into the industry and also like so much in debt by trying to get this off the ground. I had like signed for personal loans. Like there was just so many things that was like going on in my life that luckily, when the company sold, I kind of dug myself out of that. But really lots of learnings there. Yeah, so I think just getting into the wrong industry was a very bad idea. But sometimes like you need to kind of just ride it out, right? You can't just pull the plug. Like I wish I could, but my co-founder had given up other opportunities to join me, so that was our second company together. So I needed to see it through,
right,
for him more than anything.
I am like on that train, right? I mean, I've been in real estate for 20 years. This is effectively my third tech startup, right? So Russo was the first. I left pretty early because it was 2010 and like nobody was raising money, and that's when I went and became one of the co-founders at Concierge Auctions, which we really built a tech company within Concierge that after I left, they sold to Berkshire Hathaway, right? And then third was SparkOffer. And so now that I sold SparkOffer at auction.com, people are like, hey, what are you going to do next? I'm like, in what? And they're like, in real estate. And I'm like, nothing.
Never.
Like, not doing
Never
that again. Right? And there's two aspects to it, right? I've learned, these are 3 things I've learned along the journey, right? One is, and I really need to look up this gentleman's name because I can picture in my head, he's a famous Nigerian product manager, product leader that was at Calendly. He's now at Typeform. He's worked at some amazing...
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right?
I think it starts with an O, his name.
It does. It starts with an O. And so he said on one of his podcasts for his investment thesis of when he looks at investing in a startup, that he never invests in a startup that their product is used less than 3 times a week in the user's journey. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing, right? Like I wish I had heard that before.
Yeah.
Because
it's so obvious, right?
It's so obvious.
Now that you hear it, when you say it out loud, you're like, oh yeah,
right?
No shit.
And, exactly. But like in the product that I was building with SparkOffer, like, I mean, there's agents that don't make an offer once a year. And so... Well,
open houses, which was Spacio, is like once a week maximum. Or like maybe twice if you have a team, but it's tough. Yeah,
exactly. So that's number one. The second, market size. The market size is not as big as everybody thinks, right? Take Auth0, right? Like we use Auth0 as our user authentication. Like every person on the planet is a potential like user of Auth0 through somebody's app, right? And that person could actually be in Auth0 like 50 different times through different apps, right? So there's an infinite number of apps that can be created. There's an infinite number of people that can use that app, right? Or there's a finite people, but it's billions of people, but they can use it multiple times. So it has this massive scaling effect. You don't have that in real estate. And 3 is as you said, people that don't value technology, right? I mean, if you look at the industry as a whole, the only main real technology that is stuck as a transformation of business is digital signatures.
I mean, I guess I made that mistake twice, but you made it more than me. So, why did you keep going back into it? Outside of it just being like a creature of habit thing.
Concierge Auctions didn't start out as a tech firm, right? Concierge Auctions started out really as a brokerage that did auctions, right? And we wound up, technology started advancing in the use of auctions, and we went from like literally flying around the country, which is why I've been to Hawaii well over 50 times, because in the 2010, 11, 12, we were there almost every month auctioning homes somewhere on one of the islands. And we would literally bring a team of people and be at a house and hold a physical auction, right? And that morphed into like 2013, where that started to move on to online. And then we just built our own tech for it, right? And it wasn't actually just tech for the auctions themselves. We actually really built a customer lifecycle system. But again, I personally am not going to be founding another prop tech startup. They all seem like a good idea, but I think that now I can put it to rest. Well, hey, we've been here. Is there anything else like you just would love to talk about, share anything that you want to share about eWebinar that might be exciting, that maybe even like you've announced, but you want to reinforce the message?
I guess it's interesting because we started, I guess on the topic of this startup, like a lot of people like give you advice early on and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Or like smart people give you advice and you're like, I'm not going to do that. Right? And then like a couple of years later, you're like, oh yeah, like it makes sense now. And there's been like a few of those things with eWebinar as well. And I think in the beginning, people are like, well, you got to choose a vertical, right? Or like you got to choose a line of business and you got to go after that. Like, for example, like this should be a training product. This should be a marketing product. You can't go after all these roles. And I think while I like heard them, in the beginning, I didn't feel like I was in a position to not get revenue when I needed it.
Right. I felt that pressure.
We are a bootstrap company.
Exactly. So you get it however you can.
Yeah. And I think that being able to choose like a channel, like one channel, one role, one industry is like an earned luxury.
Right.
And I mean, there's a flip side to say like, well, but your product can be, much more laser focused, blah, blah, blah. Like I know that, obviously. Right. But when your burn, especially in the beginning as a bootstrap company, is like 20, 25 grand a month, and your revenue is like 1,000, like, what are you going to do?
Right.
So I guess like the big shift that we have now, so we've been in business for 5 years, but the product has been live for like a little over 3, because the first bit was like building the product. And now we're kind of finally in the position where we feel like everyone's getting paid well. Like we're not burning more than what we're making personally,
right,
which is a huge milestone for us.
Huge.
And we can now take a step back. We can move slower, and now we can choose an actual like line of business that we want to go after. So the big shift now is that we're going to go like really tailor the product and the marketing and the language to training and onboarding, like really customer success. And in doing that, we actually removed like all the sales and marketing language from our website. And like knowing that people that are like marketers are still going to find us, because this is a product that they naturally gravitate to.
Right.
But this is a product that CS people don't naturally gravitate to. Because they're just using something else. Right. Like they know about webinars, they're using Zoom or whatever it is, right? Like Livestorm, whatever it is, because they're used to running live. They're not used to automating.
Right.
But marketers, their entire business, their entire existence is automating, and how can I do less with more? But, operations people don't think like that. But CS people run a lot more of these, run a lot more webinars than like a salesperson that might just run like one demo. So financially, it's just a better decision for us. But we just didn't have the luxury of choosing, I think, before this year. So moving forward, like our product is going to be, I think, much more like CS focused, much more education focused. much more like kind of LMS light focus. Like I honestly think that where LMSs are today is like where CRMs were like 20 years ago.
Right.
And then all this like kind of new CRMs is just kind of swooped in, and it became like the new CRM. That became the standard, right? So I do think that there's opportunity in like delivering kind of repetitive education, but we're still trying to figure out like exactly where we're positioned. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, when you hit, $1 million ARR, that's when you scale. It's like, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Like when you hit $1 million, it just means that you have less financial stress, but you still don't know who you are. Like we still don't know who we are.
I get
but
it.
We're trying to figure that out.
I get it. I spent a lot of time this year with 2 books, right? So like we all read books, you tend to read them and then sort of like be like, oh, it was really good. I picked up like these ones, like I treated more like textbooks. Like, and I kept going back to them, right? In the struggle of figuring out like, not just who I am, but who am I serving and how do I communicate with them, right? And one was April Dunford's Obviously Awesome. Which
I've read that as well.
I've now read it multiple times. And then she's referred, it's kind of funny, this is actually the funny part. So she refers all the time in her books to Positioning by Jack Trout. And I read that book like 20 years ago, and like it is literally sitting on my bookshelf. And I read it 20 years ago, was probably like, this was a good book, but now I like was like really studying it. Right.
Yeah.
And I've been working really hard to apply it, right, to my business, because I think as, along the journey as a founder, we always think it's the product. The product is going to carry the weight, right? Like I just need this next feature that's going to get me like the catapult up into the right growth. And my thinking has shifted, which is more than the product, it's the messaging, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so, yes, I have product people, right? Yes, I have engineers, but like I'm spending most of my time evaluating the effectiveness of how we're communicating with others.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a ton of features within the product that people just never find. Right. And it's like, how do you surface those? I mean, that's all in the whole onboarding thing, right? Like, and we use, we're only starting now to use User Pilot. We never measured anything before a month ago.
Right.
Like everyone's talking about making data-driven decisions. Like I have a suspicion that no one actually does it. They just talk about it. Like, you know how hard it is? Like measuring data is one thing, but making sense of that data is a completely different thing. And again, it's like a full-time job.
It's not even that easy to measure it. Like we run Mixpanel, and I'm always like, are these numbers really right? Like, are you sure that thing's firing?
No, exactly. But yeah, I mean, we're just always learning and trying things, and as long as you're making more money than you're burning, everything's going to be fine.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
That's the truth.
Well, this was so awesome. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time willingly, and always so great to talk to you. And I wish you the best of 2025 coming up and going back home to Europe. And I can't wait to talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.